The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the station's announcement system crackled to life. A voice, shaking and rushed, broke through the static. "Attention all personnel. Containment breach in the Xenobiology Wing. Specimen Corvath 9 Delta has escaped primary holding. All students and staff are advised to—" The voice cut out. Static filled the speakers for a moment, and then there was nothing. The announcement system went dead. The classroom erupted. A Feluri student near the back let out a high-pitched distress cry, the kind that her species made when they believed death was near. 2 Drellians stood up so fast that they knocked their seats over. A cluster of small Venari students, creatures that looked like walking plants with thin green limbs, began pressing themselves into the corners of the room, trembling and curling their bodies into tight protective balls. Tivron had not moved. He sat in his seat, perfectly still, his bioluminescent skin almost completely dark now. His 4 eyes were wide. His 4 hands were locked on the edge of his desk. He was not breathing. Kyle stayed in his seat. He did not stand. He did not shout. He let his eyes move across the room slowly, taking in every detail. 1 door, no windows except the observation wall, which was sealed and led to the vacuum of space. 26 alien students, 1 instructor, Laura. And somewhere outside, in the corridors of this station, a Class 7 apex predator was loose. He looked at the display screen. The image of the Corvathi was still frozen there. 6 legs, bone blades, no eyes, thermal hunting, silent. He looked at Laura. Laura was already on her datapad, her fingers moving fast across the screen. She had pulled up the Academy's specimen registry, a database that listed every alien organism kept on the station for research. Her face was tight with focus. "Got it," she said quietly, leaning across the aisle toward Kyle. Corvath 9 Delta. Adult male Corvathi. 3 meters long, approximately 200 kilograms. Classified as a Class 7 apex predator. It was being kept sedated in a containment unit in the Xenobiology Wing. "Which is where?" Kyle asked. 2 decks above us, connected to this deck by a service corridor. Kyle's jaw tightened. That was close. That was very close. "What else?" he asked. Laura scrolled through the data. "It is an ambush predator, evolved on a jungle moon with low light and dense vegetation. It hunts using thermal vision. It sees body heat, not light. It is fast over short distances, extremely strong. Those bone ridges along its spine are not just for show. They are sharp enough to cut through standard station plating." She paused and looked at him. Her voice dropped even lower. "It is built to kill in the dark. And the power on this station is not looking stable." As if to prove her point, the lights flickered again. One of the ceiling panels went dark entirely, casting a long shadow across the far side of the classroom. Several students cried out. Instructor Melkari moved to the communication panel on the wall beside the door. He pressed several buttons. Nothing happened. He pressed more. Still nothing. The panel was dead. "Communications are down in this section," Melkari said. His voice was calm, but Kyle could see the slight tremor in his long, segmented limbs. The Korath were not a species built for crisis. They were thinkers, scholars, creatures of patience and study. Melkari was handling it better than most, but he was afraid. "Can we reach station security?" Laura asked. Melkari shook his narrow head. "Not from here. The communication lines appear to be disrupted. I believe the power failure may have damaged the relay nodes on this deck." A Drellian student named Sorith, one of the larger aliens in the class, stood up and pointed toward the door. "Then we should leave. Now, we should get to the central hub where the security teams are stationed." Several students nodded and started moving toward the door. "Stop," Kyle said. The word was not loud. He did not shout, but there was something in his voice that made every student in the room freeze in place. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something else entirely. A calm, heavy authority that came from somewhere deep inside him, from a part of his brain that most alien species did not have. The part that had evolved over millions of years to take control when danger was near. "Nobody opens that door," Kyle said. He stood up slowly. "We do not know where the creature is. If it has reached this deck through the service corridor, it could be anywhere in the halls outside. If we go out there in a group, scattered and panicking, it will pick us off one by one. That is what ambush predators do." Soreth stared at him. "Then what do you suggest, human? That we sit here and wait to die?" "I suggest we stay together, stay quiet, and stay alive." Kyle looked around the room. "This room has one door. That is a disadvantage if we need to escape, but it is an advantage if we need to defend. One entry point means the creature can only come at us from one direction." He turned to Melkari. "Instructor, is there anything in this room we can use to block or reinforce the door?" Melkari thought for a moment, then pointed to the heavy metal specimen stands along the side wall. Each one was made of galactic alloy, dense and strong. "Those stands are bolted to the floor, but the bolts can be released manually. Laura, help me with those." Laura was already moving. She crossed the room and crouched beside one of the specimen stands, finding the manual release bolt at its base. Kyle did the same with another. Within 2 minutes, they had freed 3 of the stands and dragged them toward the door. The alien students watched them in silence. None of them moved to help. They were not being selfish or lazy. They were simply frozen. Most of the species in this room had evolved on gentle worlds with stable climates and few natural threats. Their instinct when faced with a predator was to hide, to flee, or to become still and hope the danger passed. The idea of actively preparing to fight was foreign to them in the deepest possible way. Kyle and Laura stacked 2 of the stands against the door, creating a crude but solid barricade. Kyle tested it with his shoulder. It would not stop the Korvathi for long, but it would slow it down, and sometimes a few extra seconds were all you needed. Laura opened one of the lab drawers built into the side wall and found a length of reinforced cable, the kind used to secure heavy equipment during transport. She looped it over her shoulder. In another drawer, she found a set of cutting tools, nothing designed as a weapon, but sharp enough to do damage. Kyle looked at the front of the room. The instructor's lectern was made of solid galactic alloy. It was heavy, probably 20 kilograms, with a flat top and a thick base. He lifted it with both hands, testing its weight. It was not a sword or a gun, but it was something. He set it down beside the door and turned to face the class. "Listen to me," he said. "All of you. I need you to move to the far corner of the room, behind the last row of seats. Stay low. Stay quiet. Do not make any sudden movements. The creature hunts by heat, so the more you cluster together, the harder it will be for it to single out one target." Melkari began guiding the students to the back corner. Most of them went without argument. A few were crying. The Faluri student who had screamed earlier was shaking so badly that one of the Venari had to support her with a vine-like arm. Tivrin had still not moved from his seat. His skin was almost black now, the glow nearly gone entirely. Kyle stopped in front of him. "Tivrin," Kyle said gently, "I need you to move to the back with the others." Tivrin looked up at him. His 4 eyes were wet. "Is it going to kill us?" he asked. "No," Kyle said. "It is not. How do you know?" Kyle looked at him steadily. "Because it has to get through me first." Tivrin stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stood. His 4 legs were shaking, but he walked to the back of the room and joined the others in the corner. Kyle turned back to the door. Laura was standing beside the barricade, the cable in one hand and a cutting tool in the other. She looked at him and nodded. The corridor outside, was silent. No footsteps, no alarms, no voices, just the low hum of the station and the distant flicker of failing lights. Then Kyle heard it, a scratching sound, light at first, almost soft, like claws being drawn slowly across metal. It was coming from somewhere down the corridor. It stopped, then started again, closer this time. Then silence. Then a sound that Kyle had never heard before, a low, deep clicking that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It resonated through the walls and the floor, a slow, rhythmic pulse that vibrated in his chest. Laura's face went pale. "That is its hunting call," she whispered. "It makes that sound to disorient prey." On Korvath 9, the clicking echoes through the jungle, so the prey cannot tell which direction the predator is coming from. Kyle said nothing. He picked up the lectern and held it in front of him. His eyes were locked on the door. The clicking stopped. Silence. Then something hit the door from the other side. The impact was massive. The metal door buckled inward, bending at the center. The specimen stands behind it shifted, but held. Dust fell from the ceiling. The alien students screamed. A second impact. The door bent further. One of the specimen stands scraped backward across the floor. A third impact. A seam appeared along the edge of the door, letting in a sliver of pale corridor light. Through the gap, Kyle could see something dark and huge moving on the other side. He could feel the heat of it. He could hear its breathing, slow, wet, and heavy. Kyle shifted his weight and squared his shoulders. He adjusted his grip on the lectern. Behind him, 26 aliens and 1 human woman were counting on him to hold that line. He exhaled slowly through his nose. The door screamed on its hinges. Kyle did not move. He was ready. The door gave way on the 4th hit. It did not swing open like a normal door. It was torn from its track entirely, the metal bending and folding as something enormous forced its way through. One of the specimen stands flew sideways and crashed into the wall. The second one was shoved straight back across the floor, screeching against the tiles. The third tipped and rolled, slamming into the front row of seats. And then the Korvathi was inside the room. It was bigger than the images on the display screen had suggested, nearly 3 meters long from its flat eyeless head to the tip of its heavy tail. 6 thick legs, each ending in curved black claws that dug into the floor tiles as it moved. Its body was covered in dark, armored hide that looked almost like stone, and along its spine a row of bone blade ridges stood up like the teeth of a saw. Every part of it, from its claws to its plated skull, had been shaped by millions of years of evolution for one purpose only: to hunt, to catch, and to tear apart anything made of flesh and heat. It had no eyes. Its head was smooth and flat, with a wide jaw that hung slightly open, showing rows of short, thick teeth, designed not for cutting, but for crushing. It did not need eyes. It could see heat. Every warm body in that room was a bright, glowing shape to the creature, like candles burning in a dark cave. Its head turned slowly, scanning the room. It made a low, wet clicking sound deep in its throat. Then it locked on to the cluster of alien students in the far corner. 26 warm bodies, packed together, trembling, radiating fear and heat. The Korvathi lunged. It moved fast, terrifyingly fast for something so large. Its 6 legs drove it forward like a freight train, the bone blades on its spine rattling with the force of its charge. The alien students screamed. Some tried to run. Others curled into themselves and froze. Kyle moved faster. He threw himself between the Korvathi and the students, planting his feet wide and swinging the steel lectern with everything he had. The flat face of the lectern connected with the side of the creature's head with a sound like a hammer hitting stone. The impact jolted up through Kyle's arms and into his shoulders. He felt his teeth rattle. The Korvathi's charge broke. Its head snapped sideways, and one of the bone ridges near its jaw cracked and splintered. The creature staggered 2 steps to the left, its claws scraping deep grooves into the floor. A sound came from its throat, not the clicking this time, but a high, sharp shriek that rang off the walls and made Kyle's ears hurt. It was angry. Kyle did not wait. He took a step forward and swung the lectern again, this time bringing it down on the creature's front left leg. The impact was hard enough to make the Korvathi stumble. It tried to turn its head toward him, its flat jaw opening wide, and Kyle could feel the heat of its breath against his face. It smelled like rotting vegetation and blood. "Laura, now," Kyle said. Laura came in from the right. She had been circling the creature while Kyle held its attention, moving quietly along the edge of the room with the reinforced cable in her hands. As the Korvathi turned toward Kyle, Laura whipped the cable around one of its hind legs, just above the knee joint, where the armor plating was thinnest. She pulled hard, using her full body weight, and the cable bit into the joint. The creature's back leg buckled. The Korvathi spun toward her, fast and violent, its tail sweeping in a wide arc. Laura threw herself to the floor, and the tail passed over her by inches, smashing into a row of seats and reducing them to twisted metal. She rolled and came up on her feet, still holding the cable. Kyle used the opening. He stepped in close and drove the bottom edge of the lectern into the soft tissue just behind the creature's jaw, the one spot where the armor plating did not reach. The Korvathi let out another shriek, louder than before, and threw its head sideways. The movement caught Kyle across the chest and sent him stumbling backward. He hit the wall hard, the breath going out of him, but he kept his grip on the lectern and stayed on his feet. In the back corner, the alien students watched in complete disbelief. They had studied humans in class. They had read the reports. They had seen the data on Earth's gravity, on human muscle density, on human endurance and pain response. But reading about it and seeing it were 2 entirely different things. No species in their experience charged toward a Class 7 apex predator. Every instinct in the galaxy, every survival strategy developed on every world said the same thing when faced with a creature like the Korvathi. Run, hide, become still, play dead, anything but what this human was doing. Kyle was advancing. He was walking toward the creature, the dented lectern held in front of him like a shield, his jaw set hard, and his eyes locked on the Korvathi with a focus that was almost terrible to see. He did not look afraid. He looked angry. He looked like something the alien students had never seen before, a predator that had decided to fight, not because it had no other choice, but because there were lives behind him that he refused to let go. The Korvathi lunged again. Kyle sidestepped, and the creature's jaw snapped shut on empty air. He brought the lectern down on the top of its head, and the impact drove the creature's chin into the floor. Its claws scrabbled for grip, tearing long gashes in the tiles. Laura came in again from the side. She had wrapped the cable around a broken seat leg for leverage, and now she lashed it around the creature's other hind leg, pulling hard in the opposite direction. The Korvathi's rear legs were now tangled, its movement restricted. It thrashed and twisted, trying to free itself, but Laura held firm, her boots sliding on the floor as the creature's strength threatened to drag her forward. "I cannot hold it long," she called out. "You do not need to," Kyle said. He stepped in close. The Korvathi's head swung toward him, and its jaw opened wide. Kyle shoved the lectern straight into its mouth, wedging it sideways between the creature's upper and lower jaw. The creature bit down, and the metal groaned and bent, but it held. The Korvathi could not close its mouth. It shook its head violently, trying to dislodge the lectern, and in doing so, it swiped one of its front claws blindly at Kyle. The claw caught his left forearm. It cut through the fabric of his uniform and into the skin beneath, slicing a long, deep gash from his elbow to his wrist. Blood, red, bright, human blood, sprayed across the floor and splattered the creature's armored hide. Kyle made a sound through his teeth. Not a scream, not a cry. A sharp hiss of pain, followed by a hard exhale. He looked down at his arm. The wound was bad. Blood was running freely down his hand and dripping from his fingers. On any alien world, in any alien body, an injury like that would mean collapse, shock, retreat. Kyle looked at his arm for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked back at the Korvathi. And he kept fighting. In the corner, Tivron watched the blood fall. His 4 eyes were wide. His skin had gone completely dark, but not from fear this time. It was something else. Something his species did not have a word for. He was watching a creature from a death world bleed and refuse to stop. He was watching a human absorb a wound that would have killed a Solari, and simply continue as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. Kyle grabbed the edge of the lectern, still jammed in the Korvathi's mouth, and twisted it hard. The creature shrieked around the metal, a muffled, desperate sound. Laura pulled the cables tighter. The Korvathi's hind legs buckled completely, and it dropped to the floor, its belly hitting the tiles with a heavy thud. Kyle did not stop. He put his shoulder against the lectern and pushed the creature across the floor, foot by foot, toward the broken doorway. The Korvathi fought him. It dug its front claws into the tiles, tearing up chunks of floor. One of its bone ridges slashed across Kyle's shoulder, cutting through his uniform and leaving a thin red line on his skin. He pushed harder. Laura moved with him, keeping the cables tight, guiding the creature's hind legs toward the door. Together, step by step, they forced the massive predator backward, across the classroom. The alien students did not move. They did not speak. They barely breathed. They just watched. When the Korvathi was nearly at the door, Kyle planted his feet, drew a deep breath, and let out a sound that none of them had ever heard before. It was a roar. Not a word, not a scream. A deep, raw, primal sound that came from somewhere in Kyle's chest that had nothing to do with civilization or language or thought. It was the sound of a human being who had decided that nothing was going to get past him. It was the sound of 40,000 years of survival, of hunting, of fighting, of standing between the fire and the dark. It echoed through the classroom. It echoed down the corridor. It echoed through the walls of the station. Every alien within earshot froze. Security guards 3 decks away looked at each other with wide eyes. A Korath engineer working on a power relay dropped his tools and took a step back from the wall without knowing why. The Korvathi hesitated. For the first time since it had entered the room, it hesitated. Kyle shoved the lectern forward one more time, and the creature stumbled backward through the broken doorway and out into the corridor. Laura released the cables and stepped back. Kyle stood in the doorway, bleeding from his arm and shoulder, breathing hard, the dented and cracked lectern still in his hands. The Korvathi crouched in the corridor, clicking softly. Not yet. Kyle looked at it with steady eyes. Blood dripped from his fingers to the floor. Behind him, Laura pulled the closest remaining students away from the door. And in the far corner of the room, Tivron's skin began to glow again, faintly, weakly, but for the first time since the breach alarm, it glowed. The corridor was narrow. That was the first thing Kyle noticed as he stepped through the broken doorway. The ceiling was low enough that he could reach up and touch it if he stretched. The walls were smooth metal panels, lined with emergency lighting strips, half of which had gone dark. The floor was cold under his boots. The air tasted recycled and stale. The Korvathi crouched 6 meters ahead of him, its body low to the ground, its 6 legs spread wide. It was watching him with that eyeless head, reading his body heat like a map. The clicking sound had slowed. It was no longer the rapid, aggressive hunting call from before. It was slower now, measured, cautious. The creature was reassessing. Kyle held the lectern in front of him. His left arm was burning. The gash from the creature's claw ran from his elbow to his wrist, deep enough that he could feel the edges of the wound shift every time he moved his hand. The blood had slowed from a spray to a steady drip, running down his fingers and leaving a trail of red drops on the gray floor behind him. He did not look at the wound. He kept his eyes on the creature. Behind him he heard the sound of the classroom's emergency lock engaging, a heavy clank of metal bolts sliding into place. Laura had sealed the door. Good. That meant the students were behind a locked barrier, and the only thing between them and the predator was Kyle. He was alone. The thought settled into his mind with a strange calmness. He had been alone before, in training, in the field, on nights back on Earth, when the world felt too big and too dark, and the only thing that kept him moving was the simple, stubborn refusal to stop. He shifted his grip on the lectern and took a slow step forward. The Korvathi reacted immediately. Its body tensed, and its bone blade ridges rose along its spine like the hackles of a dog. The clicking grew louder. It shifted its weight to its front legs, preparing to spring. Kyle stopped. He did not retreat. He just stopped and waited. He watched the creature's legs, looking for the telltale shift of weight that would signal a lunge. On Earth, he had learned to read the bodies of animals, the way a dog's shoulders tighten before it bites, the way a snake coils before it strikes. The Korvathi was alien, but the principles were the same. Predators were predators no matter what world they came from. They all had tells. The creature lunged. It came at him low and fast, its front claws reaching for his legs. Kyle twisted sideways and let the creature rush past him, then swung the lectern in a tight arc and caught the creature on the back of the head. The impact rang through the corridor like a bell. The Korvathi skidded forward, its claws tearing at the floor, and crashed into the wall with enough force to dent the metal panel. He closed the distance and brought the lectern down on the creature's exposed side, targeting the joints where the armored plates met. Each hit sent a jolt up through his arms. The lectern was getting heavier. His muscles were starting to burn. The Korvathi recovered faster than he expected. It spun on its middle legs and whipped its tail around in a flat, powerful sweep. Kyle tried to dodge, but the corridor was too narrow. The tail caught him across the ribs on his right side. He heard something crack. Pain exploded through his chest, sharp and white and blinding. He hit the wall and slid down to one knee. For a moment, his vision went dark at the edges. He could not breathe. His ribs screamed with every movement. He braced one hand on the wall and forced himself back to his feet. It took everything he had. The Korvathi was already turning toward him. It clicked. The sound was faster now, almost eager. It could feel that Kyle was weaker than before. On Korvath 9, this was the moment the hunt ended. The prey was injured. The prey was slowing. The final strike was coming. But Kyle was not prey. He sucked air through his teeth, ignoring the stabbing pain in his side, and raised the lectern again. His arms were shaking. Blood from his left arm had made the grip slippery, and he had to adjust his hold twice. His right side felt like it was on fire. He took a step forward. The Korvathi hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Kyle had seen it before in predators on Earth. It happened when the animal expected the prey to run or collapse, and the prey did neither. It created a moment of confusion, a brief pause in the predator's programming. On Earth, it was sometimes enough to save your life. Kyle took another step, then another. He was not trying to kill the creature. He did not have the tools for that, and he knew it. The Korvathi's armor was too thick, and the lectern was already dented and cracking. What he was trying to do was simpler and harder at the same time. He was trying to outlast it. The Korvathi was an ambush predator. Its entire body was built for short, explosive attacks, quick lunges, fast kills, sudden violence. It was not built for sustained combat. Its muscles were designed for bursts of speed, not endurance. Every minute that passed, every failed lunge, every missed strike, drained its energy faster than it could recover. Kyle, on the other hand, was a human. His species had evolved on the open plains of Africa, running down prey over distances that would kill most animals. The human body was a machine built for one thing, above all else: to keep going, to absorb damage, manage pain, regulate heat, and continue long after any other creature in the galaxy would have stopped. It hurt. Everything hurt. His arm was still bleeding. His ribs were cracked. His muscles were screaming for rest. But Kyle had learned something a long time ago, back in the marine training fields on Earth. Pain was information. It told you something was wrong, but it did not decide what you did next. That decision belonged to the person feeling it. And Kyle had decided he was not stopping. He baited the creature. He let it lunge, stepped aside and struck it when it missed. He aimed for the legs, for the joints, for the soft spots behind its jaw and under its belly. Each hit was weaker than the last, but each one counted. Each one slowed the creature a little more. 3 minutes passed, then 5, then 8. The Korvathi's movements were changing. Its lunges were shorter. Its recovery time between attacks was longer. Its clicking had become irregular, broken by pauses where the creature just stood and breathed heavily. Its armored sides heaved with effort. A thin greenish fluid was leaking from the cracks Kyle had opened in the creature's plating, the creature's equivalent of blood. Kyle's vision was blurring at the edges. He blinked hard to clear it. The corridor seemed to tilt slightly, and he had to widen his stance to stay upright. Blood loss. He knew the feeling. He had maybe 10 more minutes of useful strength before his body started shutting down non-essential functions to keep his core alive. He needed to hold. Just hold. Inside the classroom, behind the sealed door, Laura was talking to the students. "I need everyone to stay calm," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. She hid them behind her back. "Kyle is keeping the creature away from us. Station security will be here soon." Tivron looked up at her from where he was crouched in the corner. "Why is he out there?" he asked. His voice was small and thin. "He could have come inside with us. He could have sealed the door with him on this side. Why did he stay out there alone?" Melkari answered before Laura could. The old Korath was sitting against the wall, his long limbs folded around himself, his dark eyes fixed on the sealed door. "Because the door would not hold against the Korvathi for long," Melkari said quietly. He knew that. If he sealed himself inside with us, the creature would eventually break through, and we would all be trapped in a room with no exit and a predator. By staying in the corridor, he keeps the creature focused on him. He gives it a target. He gives security time to arrive. Tivron's skin flickered. "But it could kill him." "Yes," Melkari said, "it could." "Then why?" Melkari was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was very soft. "Because he is a human. Their species does not abandon the vulnerable. It is not strategy alone. It is something deeper, something in their blood. They evolved to protect the members of their group, even at the cost of their own lives. It is one of the things that makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not their strength or their endurance, though those are remarkable. It is the fact that they will use those gifts for others without hesitation." Tivron looked at the door again. On the other side, he could hear the dull impact of metal on armor. He could hear the creature's shrieks, and he could hear Kyle, still moving, still fighting. In the corridor, Kyle was running out of time. He could feel it. His body was sending warning signals that he could not ignore much longer. His left hand had gone numb. His breathing was shallow, because deep breaths sent daggers of pain through his cracked ribs. His legs felt heavy, like he was walking through water. The Korvathi was slowing too, but not fast enough. Kyle sidestepped, but his leg gave slightly, and the creature caught his shoulder with one of its front claws. The impact spun him around, and he hit the wall with his back. He tasted blood. Something was wrong inside his chest. He did not want to think about what. He pushed himself off the wall and raised the lectern one more time. It felt like it weighed 100 kilograms. Then he heard it. Boots. Heavy, fast, disciplined boots hitting the floor at a run. Voices sharp and commanding, speaking in Vrelian, the language of the station's security force. A squad of Vrelian guards appeared at the far end of the corridor. They were big by alien standards, nearly as tall as Kyle, covered in thick gray skin, wearing full body armor and carrying pulse rifles. There were 6 of them, moving in tight formation. They stopped when they saw the scene. Kyle Bennett was standing in the middle of the corridor, his uniform torn and soaked with blood. His left arm was hanging at his side, still dripping red onto the floor. He was holding a lectern that was so dented and cracked it barely held together. And in front of him, the Korvathi, a Class 7 apex predator, was on the ground, its sides heaving, its legs folded beneath it, too exhausted to stand. The lead guard, a Vrelian named Sergeant Dorath, lowered his rifle slightly and stared. "You held it off?" he asked. "Alone?" Kyle's vision was swimming. He swayed slightly on his feet, but did not fall. He looked at Dorath and said, "There were students behind that door." Dorath stared at him for another moment. Then he turned to his squad and gave the order to secure the creature. 2 guards moved forward with containment restraints. 2 more kept their rifles trained on the Korvathi. The last 2 moved to Kyle. Kyle did not let them help him until the classroom door was unsealed, and the students began filing out into the corridor, shaken. He watched them come out. The Faluri, the Drellians, the Venari, Melkari, and finally, Tivrin and Laura. Laura looked at him. She looked at the blood on the floor, on the walls, on his clothes. She looked at the dented wreck of the lectern, still hanging from his right hand. "You absolute idiot," she said. Kyle smiled. It was a tired smile, thin and weak, but real. Then his legs gave out, and he dropped to one knee. The Vrelian guards caught him before he hit the floor. One of them muttered something in Vrelian as they lowered him gently to the ground. The word roughly translated to a single term that every species in the galaxy knew: Deathworlder. Kyle woke up in the medical bay with a tube in his arm and a dull ache in every part of his body. The room was white and clean, filled with the soft beeping of alien monitoring equipment. The bed was designed for a species with a longer torso than his, so his feet hung off the end. A small window on the far wall showed the orange glow of Velani Prime turning slowly in the dark. He blinked at the ceiling and tried to sit up. Pain flared across his right side, and he stopped, letting out a slow breath through his teeth. His left arm was wrapped in a medical binder, a thin alien device that sealed wounds and accelerated tissue repair. It itched badly. His ribs had been stabilized with a compression field, a warm band of energy that held the cracked bones in place while they healed. He could feel it humming faintly against his skin. A Drellian nurse noticed he was awake and came over. She checked the monitors beside his bed, tapping a datapad with her thin, webbed fingers. Her neck slits flared open and closed as she worked, a sign of concentration in her species. "Your injuries," she said, her voice cool and professional through the translator. include a deep laceration to the left forearm, requiring 42 microsutures, 2 cracked ribs on the right side, a fractured collarbone, multiple contusions, and moderate blood loss. On any other patient I have treated, these injuries would require 6 to 8 weeks of recovery and a period of supervised rehabilitation. She paused and looked at him. Your body has already begun healing at a rate that I find, frankly, difficult to believe. The tissue around the arm wound is regenerating almost twice as fast as our projections. Your bone density readings suggest that the rib fractures will stabilize within 10 days. Sounds about right. The nurse stared at him for a moment, then shook her head and walked away, muttering something in Drellian that the translator did not catch. 20 minutes later, Laura walked in. She had changed out of her torn uniform and into a clean one, but Kyle could see a thin bandage on her left hand, where the reinforced cable had cut into her skin during the fight. She carried 2 cups, one filled with something warm and steaming, the other with water. She sat down in the chair beside his bed and handed him the water. He took it with his good hand and drank. It was the best water he had ever tasted. So, Laura said, sipping from her cup, how are we feeling? Like I got hit by a bus that had 6 legs and bone swords on its back. She smiled. That is actually a very accurate description. They sat in comfortable silence for a minute. Laura looked out the window at the gas giant. The monitors beeped softly. The whole station is talking about it, Laura said after a while. Security restored the cameras on our deck about an hour after the breach. The footage from the corridor is everywhere. Every student network, every common room screen, every faculty channel. A human fighting a Class 7 apex predator with a lectern. It is the most watched recording in the Academy's history. Kyle closed his eyes. Great. You are famous, Kyle. Or infamous. Depends on who you ask. I did not do it for the cameras. I know. That is why it matters. She reached over and squeezed his hand, the good one, and they sat together in the quiet of the medical bay while the gas giant turned outside the window. The next visitor came 2 hours later. Tivron stood in the doorway of the medical bay for almost 5 full minutes before he came inside. Kyle saw him there, a small 4-armed figure with skin that glowed a soft, uncertain blue. He did not call out to him or wave him in. He just waited. Finally, Tivron walked in. His steps were slow and careful. He stopped beside Kyle's bed and stood there, his 4 hands clasped together in front of him. His glow shifted between blue and green, cycling through shades that Kyle had never seen on him before. I came to see how you are, Tivron said. I am alive, Kyle said, a bit broken but alive. Tivron nodded. He was quiet for a long moment. Kyle could see him working up to something, the way a person does when they have words inside them that are hard to say. I was afraid of you, Tivron said at last. His voice was very quiet. From the first day. When I learned that a human would be sitting next to me in class, I considered requesting a transfer. My family sent me messages telling me to be careful around you. They said humans were unpredictable, violent, that your species had evolved to kill, and that it was only a matter of time before your nature showed itself. He paused. His glow dimmed slightly. I was right that your nature showed itself, he said. But I was wrong about what that nature was. Kyle looked at him and said nothing. He just listened. You stood between us and that creature, Tivron continued. You bled for us. You fought something that should have killed you. And you did it because we were behind that door. We are not your species. We are not your family. Some of us could not even speak to you without shaking. And still, you stayed. His glow brightened. I have been trying to understand it. I have been reading about human history, about your wars and your disasters and the way your kind responds when others are in danger. And I think I understand now, at least a little. He looked Kyle in the eyes, all 4 of his eyes meeting Kyle's too. You are dangerous, Tivron said. You are the most dangerous thing on this station. But you do not use it to take. You use it to protect. That is the part we did not understand. That is the part that was missing from the reports and the data and the warnings. They told us what humans could do. They did not tell us what humans choose to do. Kyle was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I am not going to tell you we are not dangerous, Tivran. We are. Humans have done terrible things to each other and to our world. We are not perfect, and we never will be. But most of us, the ones I grew up with, the ones I served with, the ones like Laura, we believe that strength means nothing if you do not use it for the people who need it. That is what we are taught from the time we are children. You protect the ones who cannot protect themselves. It is not complicated. It is just what you do. Tivran stood still for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small object. He set it on the edge of Kyle's bed. It was a crystal, small enough to fit in Kyle's palm, but it glowed from within, a warm, steady light that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. It was beautiful. This is a heartstone, Tivran said. On my world, it is given to someone who has shown themselves to be a protector, a true one. It is one of the highest honors a Solari can offer to another being. It has never been given to someone outside our species before. Kyle picked it up carefully. The crystal was warm against his skin. The light inside it seemed to respond to his touch, glowing a little brighter. Thank you, Kyle said. Tivran nodded. Then, for the first time in all the weeks they had sat beside each other in class, he pulled a chair over and sat down next to Kyle's bed. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He just sat there, his glow steady and calm, like it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. 3 days later, Instructor Melkari submitted his formal report to the Academy Board. It was a long document, filled with technical details about the containment breach, the creature's behavior, and the response of the security team. But at the end, Melkari had added a personal note. It was not required by protocol, and it was not the kind of thing a Koroth scholar usually wrote. But Melkari felt it was necessary. The note read, "The humans are everything the galactic community fears. They are strong, fast, resilient, and capable of violence that most species cannot imagine. They come from a world that would kill the majority of known sentient life within hours. They are, by any objective measure, among the most dangerous organisms in the galaxy. But they are also something that our data and our classifications fail to capture. They are protectors. Not because they are asked to be, not because it benefits them, but because it is who they are." The human Kyle Bennett risked his life for 26 students of species he had known for only a few weeks. He did so without hesitation, without negotiation, and without any expectation of reward. I have studied predator behavior for 60 years across 47 worlds, and I have never encountered anything like it. The Deathworlders are not what we thought. They are more. Kyle returned to class on a Tuesday. He walked through the corridor the same way he always did, steady, quiet, hands at his sides. His left arm was still bandaged, and he moved carefully to protect his ribs, but he was upright and he was walking. The corridor was different this time. The alien students still stepped aside when they saw him coming. Some of them still looked nervous. A few of the younger ones still hurried out of the way. It probably always would be. Humans were Deathworlders, and that was not something you unlearned overnight. But something else was there too. As Kyle passed, a Drellian student he did not know gave him a small nod. A Faluri standing near a doorway pressed her paw to her chest, a Faluri gesture of respect. A Venari student stretched one of her vine-like arms out and brushed it lightly against Kyle's sleeve as he walked by. It was a Venari greeting reserved for family. Kyle noticed. He nodded back. He entered the ecology classroom and walked to his seat. Tivran was already there. The small Solari looked up at Kyle as he sat down, and his skin glowed a warm, steady gold. "Good morning," Tivron said. "Good morning," Kyle said. Tivron slid a small container across the desk. Kyle looked at it, then looked at Tivron. Tivron's glow brightened. "Traditional Solari morning tea. I brought an extra for you. It is not as strong as what humans drink, but I thought you might like it." Kyle opened the container. Steam rose from the pale liquid inside. It smelled like fresh grass and something sweet he could not name. "Thank you," Kyle said. He took a sip. It was mild and warm and surprisingly good. Instructor Melkari entered the room and began setting up the day's lecture. The students settled into their seats. The display screens lit up. The room filled with the quiet sounds of a normal class on a normal day. Laura slid into her seat across the aisle. She looked at Kyle, then at the tea in his hand, then at Tivron sitting comfortably beside him. She smiled. She leaned over and whispered, "Welcome back, hero." Kyle shook his head and took another sip of tea. "Just a human," he said. Around him, the classroom hummed with life. Students from a dozen worlds, 100 species, creatures of light and water and stone and air, all sitting together in a room, on a station at the edge of the galaxy. Some of them were still afraid of the human in the third row. Some of them were grateful. Some of them were both. But all of them knew one thing now. The most terrifying creature in the room was also the safest one to stand behind. And that, perhaps more than anything else, was what it meant to be human. The lecture began. Outside the window, Vailani Prime turned slowly, gold and orange, endless and vast. And inside the classroom, a small Solari with glowing skin sat next to a human with bandaged arms, and neither one of them flinched. The corridors of the Vailani Interstellar Academy were wide and clean, and filled with the soft hum of recycled air. Thousands of alien species walked through them every day, going to classes, eating in the meal halls, and studying in the libraries that floated above the station's central hub. The Academy orbited the gas giant Vailani Prime, and it was one of the most respected schools in the known galaxy. Students came from hundreds of worlds to study here, and for the past 3 years, humans had been among them. Kyle Bennett walked through the main corridor on his way to his morning ecology class. He was 24 years old, broad across the shoulders, and moved with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of military training back on Earth. He had served 2 years as a Marine before applying to the Galactic Exchange Program. Now he wore the same gray academy uniform as every other student on the station. But no one ever mistook him for just another student. A group of Falori, small fur-covered creatures with round eyes and thin limbs, spotted him coming, and immediately pressed themselves against the wall. One of them made a soft whimpering sound. Another turned and ran down a side corridor without looking back. Kyle noticed. He always noticed. He kept his eyes forward and his hands loose at his sides. He had learned a long time ago that there was no point in trying to look less threatening. He was a human. On this station, that meant he was a predator. It meant he came from a world where the gravity could crush most alien species, where the air was thick and hot, where the oceans were filled with things that could bite through bone, and where the dominant species had evolved by chasing its prey until it dropped dead from exhaustion. Earth had been classified as a Class 12 death world. That was nearly the highest rating in the Galactic Danger Index. When the galactic community had first made contact with humanity, the reaction had been something close to horror. How could a civilization rise from a world like that? How could anything survive there, let alone build cities and ships and travel to the stars? The answer, of course, was simple. Humans were tough, they were stubborn, and they never ever gave up. Kyle turned a corner and reached the door to his ecology class. He stepped inside. The room was shaped like a half circle, with rows of seats rising up from the floor toward the back wall. Large display screens hung from the ceiling, and the far wall was made entirely of glass, showing the swirling orange and gold clouds of Velati Prime. Most of the students were already seated. There were Quoroth, tall, thin insectoid creatures with clicking mandibles. There were Drellians, smooth-skinned amphibians who breathed through slits along their necks. There were a handful of Solari, small, four-armed beings whose skin glowed with soft bioluminescent light. And there were others, species Kyle still could not name, all watching him as he walked to his seat. He sat down in the third row, near the aisle. The seat next to him belonged to a Solari named Tivrin. Tivrin was small, barely reaching Kyle's chest when standing. His skin shifted between pale blue and green depending on his mood. Right now, as Kyle settled into the seat beside him, Tivrin's glow dimmed noticeably, and his four hands gripped the edge of his desk. Kyle gave him a small nod. "Morning," he said quietly. Tivrin blinked all four of his eyes and gave the tiniest nod back. He did not speak. He never spoke to Kyle unless he had to. Kyle understood. To Tivrin, sitting next to a human was like sitting next to a wild animal that had somehow learned to wear clothes and talk. The fear was real, and Kyle did not blame him for it. The door opened again, and Instructor Melhari entered. Melhari was a Quoroth, nearly 7 feet tall, with long segmented limbs and a narrow head that ended in a cluster of dark shining eyes. He moved with the slow, careful grace of his species, setting a stack of data pads on the lectern at the front of the room. His mandibles clicked softly as he greeted the class. "Today," Melhari said, his voice a dry rasp, filtered through the translator clipped to his thorax. "We will be studying apex predator ecosystems across different planetary classifications. We will look at how top-level predators shape the environments they live in, and how prey species adapt to survive." He tapped the display screen, and a series of images appeared, alien creatures from dozens of worlds. Some were massive, armored beasts with tusks and claws. Others were sleek and fast, built for speed and ambush. The students leaned forward with interest. Then Melhari turned and looked directly at Kyle. "We are fortunate to have a student from one of the most well-known predator worlds in the galaxy. Kyle, would you tell us about some of the apex predators found on Earth?" Every eye in the room turned to Kyle. He could feel the weight of their stares. He leaned back in his seat and thought for a moment. "Well," he said, keeping his voice calm and even, "we have a lot of them. Wolves hunt in packs. They work together to bring down animals much bigger than themselves. Great white sharks live in our oceans. They can sense a single drop of blood in the water from miles away. Saltwater crocodiles have been around for millions of years. They hide under the surface and grab their prey before it even knows they are there." The class was completely silent, but Drellian in the back row had stopped breathing through his neck slits. One of the Feluri students had covered her face with her paws. Tivron turned to Kyle, his glow flickering with anxiety. "Did your species ever have to fight those creatures?" he asked in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Kyle looked at him. "We didn't just fight them," he said. "We outlasted them. Humans are persistence hunters. We are not the fastest or the strongest, but we do not stop. We chased our prey across open plains for hours, sometimes days, until it collapsed from heat and exhaustion. That is how we survived. We just kept going." The silence in the room was so thick that Kyle could hear the hum of the station's life support system 3 decks below. Tivron's skin had gone almost completely dark. Melhari's mandibles had stopped clicking. The door slid open, and Laura Higgins stepped in, slightly out of breath. She was 22, with her brown hair tied back and her datapad tucked under one arm. She was a xenobiology student, one of only 4 humans at the academy, and Kyle's closest friend on the station. She scanned the room, caught the silence, and raised an eyebrow. She slid into her seat across the aisle from Kyle and leaned over. "Scaring the locals again?" she whispered. Kyle shrugged. They asked. Laura smirked and opened her datapad, beginning to pull up notes on the lecture. Around them, the alien students slowly returned to their seats, though several of them kept glancing at Kyle as though they expected him to leap across the room at any moment. Melkari cleared his throat, or whatever the Korath equivalent was, and resumed his lecture. He began discussing the predator ecosystems of Korvath 9, a jungle moon known for some of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. He showed images of a creature called a Korvathi, a six-legged beast covered in dark armor, with long bone-blade ridges running along its spine. It hunted using thermal vision, and it was completely silent. The Korvathi is classified as a Class 7 apex predator, Melkari explained. It is one of the deadliest known organisms outside of a Deathworld. The Academy's Xenobiology wing currently houses a sedated specimen for research purposes. It is kept in full containment at all times. Kyle looked at the image on the screen. The creature was big, nearly 3 meters long, built like a panther with extra legs and a ridge of blades on its back. He had seen dangerous animals before. He had grown up on a world full of them. Something about this one made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He did not say anything. He just filed it away in the back of his mind and turned his attention back to the lecture. Melkari was in the middle of explaining how prey species on Korvath 9 had evolved camouflage to avoid the Korvathi's thermal detection when something happened. A low rumble passed through the walls of the classroom. It was deep and heavy, the kind of vibration Kyle could feel in his chest. The lights flickered once, then again. The display screen on the wall glitched and went dark for a half-second before coming back. Melkari stopped speaking. His cluster of dark eyes shifted toward the ceiling. The environmental alert panel near the door flickered with a pale yellow light, then went completely dead. The room was quiet. The students looked at each other. Tivron's 4 hands gripped his desk so hard that his knuckles had turned white. Kyle sat perfectly still. He looked at Laura. She looked back at him. Neither of them said a word, but they did not need to. They both knew what a power fluctuation on a space station could mean. Something was wrong.